Nature is hugely important in all of my pieces, but particularly so for the horn concerto. I wanted to follow a train of thought that was connected to the horn and its origins in the forest. So for me, walking around the forest was just the obvious thing to do. One of the places I come for inspiration is Bedgebury Pinetum, and every time I came and walked around in this particular Pinetum, I just felt renewed and refreshed, and my ideas were enlivened. It's amazing what walking around these tall trees can do. I love the different textures in a forest, particularly the darker areas. Walking beneath really tall trees, walking into the shadows, looking up through the branches, seeing the way the light falls. It's such a mysterious place, and it's that journeying through these spaces which are sort of protected, if you like, by tall trees that I found fascinating as a means of making a musical sound which somehow follows the textures and the contours of the trees and the dark spaces between them. I began playing the horn aged 11 and instantly fell in love with the instrument actually. It's a really hard instrument, but I loved playing, particularly loved practicing, weirdly enough. But later on I did manage to become a professional horn player for a few years, about 3 years freelancing. And those years were extremely valuable to me as a composer, to have the feel of what it's like to play in an orchestra. So as a horn player I was utterly delighted to get a message from Esa-Pekka Salonen. So we met for coffee, and Esa-Pekka said, "You're a horn player, I read in your biography." And I said, "Yep." And he said, "So am I, and I've had this crazy idea that I'd love to commission you to write a concerto for 4 horns, an orchestra." And I just smiled instantly. I just thought, there's no way I can not do this. Now I'm very lucky because I have 2 places to compose, and the other one is in the southwest of France, in the middle of nowhere, where there are also lots of woodlands and forests around. And it was there that I actually began the piece. And in the forests of France there's a great history of horns for hunting, using hunting horns. And there's something called the cor de chasse, which is a type of horn which is purely natural horn with no valves, which they use to communicate when hunting. Obviously that instrument, as in all brass instruments, can be traced way back to playing of conch shells and animal horns. So for me there's just such a strong connection between the French horn and its origins in nature. So the horn concerto begins with a lot of energy, as written in the score, fleet-footed. And it's almost as if to me that the orchestra is somehow channeling the kind of spirit of things flying through the forest. And the horns, to me, are a more human element. So I feel as if the horn players are entering the orchestral realm of the forest with a certain set idea about what they want to achieve. And that kind of nonchalance and confidence is gradually slightly eroded and questioned by the forest. And I suppose another of my sort of deeper concerns that comes into the piece is what we've lost as a species, our connection with nature. And so I feel that there's these 2 different entities, the forest and the horns. Generally speaking, through the piece it's about a communication between the 2, and that changes all the time. And I wouldn't say there was a narrative or a story, although there were definitely ideas and melodies that you can hook onto, and that might lead you through the forest, as it were. So after the opening section, which is highly energetic and rushing around, it's almost as if the forest is starting to hunt the horns. They then are drawn into the darker areas of the forest, enter something which is a much more kind of ripply type of texture, almost as if they are being opened up to communication between creatures and plants within the forest. So the horns are then entering a very different textural world, much more dreamlike actually. And that's the kind of discourse that goes on through the piece, moving between something certain and something uncertain, and discoveries within stillness and within dark places, in contrast to much more dance-like, robust material. We arrive at a point of absolute stillness actually, and rest there for a long time. And it's almost as if the protection that almost is the horns who've been protected by their own egos, if you like, they've let their guard down, and something has melted, and there's a fusion between the forest and the horns. And at which point, what happens is the horn players stop using the valves on the instruments, and they start to play only on the natural side of the horns. So this is the natural harmonics, the sounds which are found in any object in nature, any vibration. So there's a fusion of the forest and the horns. I love this idea that we can somehow move closer to nature and understand it more, and that's what I try to explore in this piece.